Good evening. Well, thank you for those kind introductions and for inviting me to speak. Rolf, I think we first talked about this in 2019 or 2020. Giving this lecture, other commitments, COVID have delayed us until now, and I'm very pleased to be here giving the 21st annual Roland Batten Lecture. So my talk this evening will focus on buildings designed and constructed in Burlington from the 1930s through the 1970s, a period that encapsulates the birth, growth, and demise of modernist architecture. Time, as they say, ever marches forward, and architectural styles and trends come and go. We are now 1/4 of a way into the 21st century, and we have the luxury of being able to look back at the 20th century with some objective eyes to research and document not only the buildings of the modernist period, but also the motivations and experiences of the building owners, architects, builders, and occupants. As much as the Vermont tourism industry would like to deny it, the 20th century did happen in Vermont. This is not the land that time forgot, passed over by the modern age and encompassed in amber as a 19th century rural artifact. The period I'll be discussing this evening is what laid the groundwork for the Vermont of the present, when our state's economy expanded beyond agriculture to include manufacturing, technology, and recreation. Consider that construction of the state's first interstate highway began in 1951. IBM opened its Essex Junction manufacturing plant in 1957. Mount Snow, Sugarbush, and Killington ski areas, all founded 1954 to 1958, bookended by Stowe Mountain Resort in 1937 and Bolton Valley in 1966. This rapidly changing economic base led directly to a population boom in Burlington, which grew from 24,000 residents in 1930 to 38,000 by 1970. Such growth demands new infrastructure, including buildings, to serve the needs of the community. These are the buildings that I've been researching over the past 2 decades. So I arrived in Burlington in the fall of 2004, a transplant from Minnesota, to enroll in the Historic Preservation graduate program at the University of Vermont. And I came with a growing interest in the design and architecture of the mid-20th century, which in hindsight is not surprising. I was baptized in an A-frame church. Yeah, is there a country song in there or something? I grew up in a house of contemporary design in Minnesota. Michael McGuire, very Frank Lloyd Wright influenced. The high school I attended was designed by Benjamin Thompson, one of the foremost leaders of post-war modernism. Places like the Walker Art Center, designed by Edward Larrabee Barnes in 1971, and the adjacent Guthrie Theater, designed by Ralph Rapson in 1963, both in Minneapolis, introduced me to the extremes of 20th century design, both boxy and monolithic on the one hand, or light and transparent on the other, depending on the function of the building. These places and many more were the backgrounds of my childhood, but in the early 2000s, they were largely overlooked, or if acknowledged at all, deemed not worthy of preservation. For you, perhaps it was a modernist elementary school, or a public library, or a shopping center, or a house of worship. Many of these places are threatened or have already been lost. Indeed, the Guthrie Theater, shown here, was demolished in 2006. So, as a new resident of Burlington in 2004, I began looking around at the architecture of the community and noticed that in addition to all the wonderful buildings of the 19th century that we have here, there was also a strong body of 20th century architecture sprinkled throughout the city. I compiled my initial student research on these buildings in a report completed in 2005, 2006. And for my students that are here, think of your reports right now and you'll still be doing them in 20 years. When Rolf and Linda reached out last fall about giving this talk, I had just recently transitioned to a new job at UVM as director of the Historic Preservation Program. 20 years had passed, and I thought it might be interesting to revisit this student report and share what I had learned then, what I know now, and how we look at these buildings today, 20 years on from when I first considered them. So in my report, I identified and researched 34 properties designed by 15 different architects and firms. Don't worry, we're not talking about all of them. Just a subset. It was by no means a comprehensive survey. So I always put out the disclaimer that just because I don't mention a building tonight does not mean it isn't significant or worthy of study or protection. I just didn't get to it yet. So I'm going to focus my talk on buildings that were included in this report, which include commercial buildings, churches, apartments, restaurants, medical and dental offices, hotels and motels, government buildings, academic buildings, and one concrete hyperbolic paraboloid sculpture. Modernist design impacted almost every aspect of life in Burlington, as we can see by this suite of buildings and the different functions and uses. And you'll note, I'm not even talking about houses tonight. That's a whole nother topic. That was my thesis. Maybe future lecture. So we'll start off with one of kind of a tentative step into modernism in Burlington with the design of this storefront at 111 Church Street, where local architect Louis Sheldon Newton, embracing a nationwide trend to update and modernize storefronts during the Great Depression, composed a facade of black Carrara glass accented with gleaming aluminum trim, polished plate glass windows, and stylized aluminum letters spelling out the name of the business, the Abraham Drug Store. Newton's clean and crisp design was published nationally in the Architectural Record in 1935 as an example of the successful application of modern design principles and materials to an existing retail facade. And those giant aluminum letters, they're in the upper levels of that building. Louis Sheldon Newton came to Burlington in 1921 after working for 2 decades in his hometown of Hartford, Vermont. Best known for working in the colonial revival mode, he gradually began to incorporate modern design into his projects. He became a very respected sort of elder statesman of the architectural community, and prior to his death in 1953 at age 82, the newly formed Vermont Board of Registration for Architects granted Louis Sheldon Newton registration number 1. So this design is no longer intact. It's now the home of Danforth Pewter on Church Street. However, if you look at those little metal grills that still remain on the facade, there's a little homage to Louis Newton's design. In 1946, Newton was hired to expand his design across the upper 3 stories of the building, which he clad in cream-colored porcelain enamel steel panels and glass block windows. The design was further expanded in 1956 after Newton had passed away under the direction of architect Roland Whittier, who faithfully executed Newton's original plans. This facade remains intact today, although the building is now known as the Lunigs Block. In 1938, modernism arrived full force in Burlington in the form of a traveling exhibition titled The International Style, Architecture Since 1922, hosted by the Fleming Museum of Art at the University of Vermont. Organized by the Museum of Modern Art, this groundbreaking exhibit was derived from the landmark 1932 exhibition of modern architecture curated by Henry Russell Hitchcock and Philip Johnson, who coined the term international style to describe the forward-looking, technologically advanced, modern buildings appearing in Europe and the United States at the time. The exhibit at UVM introduced the work of Walter Gropius, Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, Le Corbusier, Richard Neutra, Frank Lloyd Wright, and many more, to the citizens of Burlington. And we know that the exhibit had an impact because a lengthy review of it in the Burlington Free Press by local architect William Freeman was published in 1938. Freeman's takeaway was that, quote, "Upon studying this exhibit, we must admit, I believe, that the international style is a widespread and serious effort to create an architectural environment for modern existence." Modernism was the future and made its presence known locally just a few years later with the construction of St. Mark Catholic Church. On September 4th, 1949, the New York Times headline reads, "Catholic Church centers its altar. Ultramodern edifice in Burlington, Vermont, built in form of cross without windows." Slow news day. The building in question, further described as, quote, "one of America's most remarkable as well as controversial Roman Catholic churches," was St. Mark's Catholic Church in the New North End, where houses were sprouting in farm fields. Completed in 1942, the church was the brainchild of Reverend William A. Tennion, who was determined to, quote, "prove that a church can be as contemporary as a V3 rocket and still be what a church ought to be: beautiful, warm, inviting, devotional, and inspiring." Reverend Tennion's most controversial idea, which is what caught the attention of the New York Times, was the decision to place the altar in the center of the sanctuary, as you can see in the picture on your left. From this point, he could officiate the Mass facing the congregation, seated on three sides of him with the organ and choir behind him. This was a dramatic departure from centuries of Roman Catholic tradition and anticipated by 20 years the reformations of the Second Vatican Council in 1962, which sought to update religious practices for the modern world. And it's happening here in 1942 in Burlington. To bring his ideas to fruition, Reverend Tennion turned to a local architectural firm, Freeman French Freeman, founded in 1937 by husband and wife William and Ruth Reynolds Freeman and partner John French. "Forget anything you know about designing churches," Reverend Tennion told the partners, which was an easy request, because at the time, none of the partners, who were all Protestants, had ever designed a church of any denomination, so no preconceived notions. The resulting building is a boxy red brick structure with a flat roof, slate trim, and glass block windows. It does have windows. Finished on the interior with oak veneered plywood, red brick, and that central altar made of Vermont Verdi antique marble. When discussing the design in the New York Times, Reverend Tennion insisted that his church was not, quote, "modern for the sake of being modern." Rather, it was built in the, quote, "construction idiom of the present." That, in a nutshell, is the embodiment of the modernist architectural movement of the early and mid-20th century, designing for the moment, using the latest materials and technologies, and looking to the future instead of the past for inspiration. And St. Mark's still stands today on North Avenue, pretty much unchanged from when it was built. Following a construction interlude during World War II, the post-war years are when modernism really takes off, both locally and nationally. One of the first post-war projects was a series of 3 dormitories at UVM designed, surprisingly, by the classically trained firm of McKim, Mead, and White. Best known for the colonial revival local landmarks such as Burlington City Hall, where we are right now, the Fleming Art Museum, countless other, the Waterman Building at UVM, the chapel. In this case, McKim, Mead, and White turns to efficiency of design and construction for the creation of 3 identical dormitories on the central campus. Affectionately dubbed the shoeboxes, For their perfectly rectangular shape, these buildings presented strong geometric forms articulated by a white framework encasing fields of red brick. An interesting aspect of the history of these buildings is how they were built, a process that involved the use of precast, steel-reinforced concrete panels that were fabricated on-site in horizontal molds and then lifted up into place vertically, horizontally by a crane, forming the walls, the roof, the floors of each building. These dorms were among the earliest applications of what was known as stack cast concrete construction and represent an important step in the development of building and construction efficiency. Once in place, the wall surfaces on the outside were clad with a red brick veneer, and the inner walls were simply painted. No need for lath and plaster or any fancy finishes. Unfortunately, this construction technique also made them very hard to remodel and maybe join little tiny boxes of rooms into, say, a larger suite. These dorms were torn down in 2015. 10 years later, in 1956, a different type of lodging, a motel, was being built on Main Street. Everyone smiles at the Midtown Motel. There's some stories. With a building lot measuring 40 feet wide and 185 feet deep. The long, narrow Midtown Motel building was perfectly suited for its site. By elevating the building one story in the air, sheltered parking was provided underneath. This building had a very distinctive presence downtown with its flat roof, minimal ornamentation, and cantilevered balconies. The project was designed by local architect Benjamin Stein and represented a shift in the typical lodging offerings in and around Burlington. The 1956 city directory lists 3 hotels, all downtown, and 3 motels, all outside of town, Shelburne Road, Williston Road. This was typical. Higher-priced hotels with more amenities were in the urban center. The lower-priced motels where you drive up and serve yourself were on the outskirts of town. The Midtown Motel, however, brought the motel model into the city, offering a less expensive alternative to the established hotels. Motel lodging gradually falls out of favor, and following a long and sad decline, the Midtown Motel was demolished in 2021. When the Midtown Motel was being built, Benjamin Stein was interviewed in the Burlington Free Press about traditional versus modern architecture, and specifically when designing for new construction. His response was that, quote, "The tradition of America is to go forward, not backward. The true tradition is progress, not a copy of the past." And while some businesses like the Midtown Motel were moving downtown, other businesses were moving out of downtown, such as the dental office of Dr. Walter Burnett, now Associates in Dentistry, some of you may go there, who in 1958 chose to move his practice out of the downtown to the South End, where he would be closer to his patients and could offer parking. Automobile age, everybody wants parking. He hired local architect Julian Goodrich to design the building, a study in vertical and horizontal planes with a wall of glass fronting the street and ribbon windows along the side elevations. At some point, the building gained an unfortunate rooftop parapet, highlighted here, which enclosed mechanical equipment on the roof and really didn't help the design. Fortunately, when the building was rehabilitated in 2009, the owners took the time to remove that parapet, relocate the equipment, restore the exterior vertical board siding, and establish a period-appropriate color scheme. The same year that Julian Goodrich was designing the Burnett Dental Office, he was also hired by the Sisters of Mercy to design a new 150-bed dormitory and dining hall for the growing student body of Trinity College. This project is perhaps the purest expression of the international style in the city, with the upper 3 stories elevated on slender pilotis, horizontal bands of ribbon windows, and glass and steel curtain walls with slate spandrel panels. Love this picture. Like the aforementioned shoeboxes on the central campus, this project also relied on an innovative construction technique. The 9-inch thick steel reinforced concrete floor slabs were poured on the ground, one on top of the other, and then hoisted into place at the rate of 8 feet an hour by hydraulic jacks, and then secured to the steel columns which hold them in place. Looking at this construction photo, I can't help but think of Le Corbusier's design for the Domino House, 1914, an open floor plan modular structure comprised of thin concrete slabs supported by thin columns around the edges. 44 years later, this system is the basis for Macaulay Hall. Many of these buildings incorporated design details that have been unsympathetically altered or lost over the decades. At the north end of Macaulay Hall, for example, as you see on your left here, the elevated upper stories were designed to shelter a ground level terrace. At some point, however, this terrace was enclosed with walls to create more interior space, dramatically altering the weightless qualities of the design and sacrificing what was a thoughtfully planned outdoor gathering place. A small chapel projected from the south elevation of the building, the design of which was executed by architect Marcel Bowden, who worked for Julian Goodrich at the time and would go on to have his own long and very successful architectural career. Another study in vertical and horizontal planes, the chapel features a semicircular end wall and a wall of windows that once contained an enormous dalle de verre, or glass slab, stained glass window, highlighted in that space. Measuring 45 feet wide and 16 feet tall, it was designed and fabricated in France by French artist Pierre Mieux and shipped to the United States on the Queen Mary. The 12 panels comprising the window were made of thick slabs of colored glass, set within a cement matrix with brilliant colors, as you can see, shining through when illuminated. With the sale of the Trinity campus to UVM in the early 2000s, the stained glass windows were removed by the Sisters of Mercy and placed in storage at St. Michael's College. If anyone's looking for a project, getting these windows reinstalled at St. Mike's would be amazing. They are there. Also in 1958, changes were taking place in downtown Burlington. The new Burlington Federal Savings and Loan Building, designed by Freeman French Freeman, was rising on Bank Street. This was a notable shift in location for a bank, away from Church Street, which is where historically all the major financial institutions were located, on Church Street. Moving on to a side street, however, enabled Burlington Federal to construct a new building from the ground up and incorporate convenient customer parking, as well as both walk-up and drive-through banking windows. This is, of course, the automobile age, and customers want the convenience of parking or not even leaving their cars and to conduct a transaction. The advanced functional design, as the Free Press called it, incorporated a steel structural frame with a curtain wall comprised of aqua-colored spandrel panels and clear glass picture windows set in an aluminum frame, flooding the open floor plan interior spaces with daylight. The modern design of this bank building was very intentional and promoted an image of openness, transparency, and friendliness to its customers. This was not an old 19th century bank built like a fortress, dark and stuffy with tellers behind caged windows. Memories of bank failures in the Great Depression still lingered in people's minds, and this design represents a fresh alternative with face-to-face, personalized service in a clean, bright, modern space. We almost lost this building in the late 1980s when a misguided attempt to, ironically, modernize it proposed cladding it with red brick, as we see on the left. Thanks to the public outcry of local architects and preservationists, this plan was fought all the way to the Vermont Supreme Court. But in 1989, the court ruled in favor of the owner's permit to alter the design of the building, with Judge Richard W. Norton stating in his ruling that, quote, "The court finds that the international style, while perhaps significant to students of architecture, does not typify any period of time important to the history of the city of Burlington." And here we are today, 35 years later, gathered to discuss the significance of the international style in Burlington. We have the luxury of the passage of time, and we are equipped with the tools and the knowledge to better understand and appreciate the architecture of this period. And although that remodeling plan was upheld and approved, an economic downturn delayed the renovations, and in the mid-1990s, the decision was made to rehabilitate the building instead of replacing the facade with brick. This rehabilitation involved replacement of the curtain walls, which were in unquestionably very poor condition. They needed replacement. The new curtain wall replicates the design intent of the original, but one concession was made. The color of the glass spandrel panels was changed from that classic 1950s aqua to the darker green that you see today. Meanwhile, at UVM, the medical school is quickly outgrowing its 1905 facility, Dewey Hall, at the north end of the University Green. Seeking to improve both the facilities as well as the image of the program, UVM hired the renowned New York firm Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill to design the new complex. Lead architect Gordon Bunshaft designed a classic modernist exterior comprised of a structural steel frame clad with precast black exposed aggregate panels. And set within this frame is an aluminum framework containing clear and white glass glazing. The associate architect on this project was, not surprisingly, Freeman French Freeman, which was responsible for the details of the design and the interiors. The first building, Medical Alumni Hall, in the foreground of these two images, was a two-story structure completed in 1959. It was followed by the Given Building, completed in two phases in 1962 and 1966. Both buildings featured large inner courtyards, which you can see on the magazine cover. Those donut holes in the middle were landscaped courtyards, which subsequent research revealed were designed by Dan Kiley. These are gone. This project and many others in the 1950s and 60s at UVM were the brainchild of President Carl W. Borgman. An engineer by training, I think he must have appreciated the rational clarity and structural expression of the international style, so much so that his official university presidential portrait includes, over his right shoulder on the left to you, a glimmering modernist glass box building. Unfortunately, these buildings have not aged well. Medical Alumni Hall, in fact, was demolished in 2000 as part of the UVM Medical Center Renaissance project. And the Given Building is still standing, but has been swallowed by accretions on the exterior, rooftop equipment, ductwork, and that once open courtyard is now roofed over with a new building built in the middle. Another UVM project of the early 1960s was the Bodie Engineering Building, designed by Barr, Linda, and Hubbard architects of Burlington. And as with most of these projects, the emphasis was on efficiency of construction and cost. So the architects utilized pre-stressed concrete panels with brick infill to form the walls of the rectangular building. The Bodie building unified for the first time all of the engineering program classrooms, laboratories, and offices under one roof. And the reinforced concrete structure design was fireproof, given the activities taking place inside, as well as structurally overbuilt to accommodate the large, heavy machinery necessary for engineering instruction. It also had a 13,000 volt electrical feed, electrical engineering program. The 3-story building is also fully air conditioned, and while it's sometimes criticized for its very small windows, which you'll see, just the little lancet windows, this is intentional. This was decided upon by the faculty and the architects who wanted to prioritize wall space for laboratories over great big windows. While the upper 2 stories have a very consistent rhythm around all 4 sides of the building, the first story, which is just slightly recessed, features precast exposed aggregate concrete panels enlivened with these wonderful abstract forms that are cast in place, designed by the Shelburne artist Frank Mann. These provide a bit of whimsy to the design, in contrast to the regular geometries of the precast panels. And unfortunately, the view on the left, you cannot see any. This was the front of the building. An entirely new building is built in front of this. So poor Bodie is kind of squished in the corner now, but it's a really nice little building. Another prominent project by Barr, Linda, and Hubbard architects was the design of the new district courthouse and state office building, one of the first new structures erected in the urban renewal area in the early 1960s. Dubbed Burlington's Acropolis on the Lake, the design took its cues from the recently completed Boston City Hall, with a fortress-like presence overlooking Lake Champlain. The building still stands today, although it's now sort of the tail end of the Costello Courthouse, and it's lost that presence that it had in the urban landscape, but it is still there. And we'll wrap up with a look at 2 downtown cathedrals and ponder their vastly different trajectories since their construction in the 1970s. The first is the Cathedral Church of St. Paul, built for the Episcopal Diocese after the burning of their building in 1971. Following an architectural competition organized by the American Institute of Architects, a group of finalists was selected that included Burlington Associates, a newer firm formed out of, in part, from Barr, Linda, and Hubbard architects, as well as Marcel Breuer of New York City, Shepley, Bulfinch, Richardson, and Abbott of Boston, among others. Shockingly, the design by Burlington Associates won and was selected and praised for its drama and simplicity. On the right is the plan by Marcel Breuer, which is interesting, but if you look closely, that back slab is actually canted backwards. It kind of looks like the whole thing's going to topple over. So I think they made a good choice. Nothing against Breuer. The design team, led by William Henderson and Tom Collins, understood the complexities of this site, sloping downhill to the south, transitioning from the city to the waterfront on the west and to the Old North End to the north. Very complex set of axes that need to be sort of corralled into a corner site. The bell tower anchors the building, which is constructed of board-formed concrete, into which narrow light slots and skylights are inserted, illuminating the interior. Whenever someone says that they think this building looks cold and dark and uninviting, I know they have never been inside it. Because you go inside, it is a phenomenal space. It's one of the great spaces in Burlington for music, for events, and just the quality of the light, the design, the texture of the concrete. It all comes together beautifully. And this design is really celebrated by the congregation. They've embraced this building, and it's in great shape. Following the burning of the Catholic Cathedral in 1972, another new church building began rising in Burlington. Determined to maintain a presence in the downtown area, the Catholic diocese undertook an exhaustive process to find the right architect for the job. 54 architects were considered before they ultimately selected Edward Larrabee Barnes of New York City. Barnes, in turn, partnered with the landscape architect Dan Kiley and his firm Kiley, Tyndall, Walker to create a designed landscape for the project. And we do have firm partner Peter Walker with us in the audience this evening. The building consists of a 5-sided sanctuary connected to a rectangular narthex with meeting rooms and offices. The green and brown glazed brick on the exterior continues onto the interior wall surfaces, and the soaring copper roof is capped with a long skylight. This is how the building looked inside and out in 2018, shortly before it was closed and deconsecrated by the Catholic Diocese. The grove of 123 locust trees surrounding the building is planted in a skewed grid that follows the geometries of the building, while the green and brown brick of the building reflect and reinforce the green foliage of the trees and the brown bark of their trunks. This is a fully designed ensemble, landscape and architecture, and it is unique in our city. Its real power lies in providing a spot of respite, a counterpoint to the ever-increasing density and congestion of downtown Burlington. Most cities would embrace the opportunity to incorporate a grove of 100 trees into their downtown and a truly unique work of architecture, but Burlington is most likely going to lose its chance to save this property. Deemed redundant, the building was put up for sale in 2019 and remains vacant and for sale today. A tremendous preservation effort has taken place over the past 5 years with ongoing preservation advocacy by local organizations and community members, as well as support from regional and national organizations, including the National Trust for Historic Preservation, the Cultural Landscape Foundation, Historic New England, the Getty Conservation Institute have all spoken up in support of this property. This preservation campaign has garnered national press, but has been stymied both in state and federal courts. Today, the property owner has a demolition permit in hand to remove the building, and my understanding is that as of Monday, that permit has been paid for and issued, so I think we know where this one is headed. And it's situations like this, a property that is so obviously of historic and architectural significance and worthy of preservation, being threatened with demolition in 2025, that keeps this topic alive for me. I do have other interests. I do have hobbies and a family. But this heritage is too important to lose. These mid-20th century buildings are part of the urban fabric of our city, just like the 1816 Unitarian Meeting House at the head of Church Street, or the City Hall that we are in today. They tell the story of our past. Or, as former State Historic Preservation Officer Eric Gilbertson argued in 1989, when Burlington Federal Bank was threatened, quote, "This era should be represented just as much as the turn-of-the-century buildings that line Church Street." We can't end on a down note. I'm not going to stop, not going to end it there. So I promised you a hyperbolic paraboloid sculpture. Here it is. Located on UVM's Redstone campus behind Coolidge Hall and the athletic complex stands Hypar 68, a thin shell reinforced concrete expression of a complex geometric form known as a hyperbolic paraboloid, which is a saddle-shaped surface with both hyperbolic and parabolic cross-sections. And yes, I had to look that up. Picture a Pringles potato chip. It curves both up and down in the same form. Hyperbolic paraboloid. Oh, just give me a minute. There we go. So it was designed and built by the 1968 civil engineering graduating class who thought they would take on a design project, put in built form what they'd been studying. They used donated materials, the students built it, and it's just a wonderfully odd piece of sculpture that is sort of tucked away. You know, I usually take a picture every time I go by. I don't know why. We almost lost this also in 2003 when it was deemed, you know, move that thing out of the way. Public outcry. It's affectionately known as the flying diaper by students. And it was spared the bulldozer after public outcry and remains standing today. It's a great little folly. For scale, you can see there's a picnic table underneath it. It's a big structure. You can walk under it, lay on top of it. Apparently, the thing to do now is to snowboard off the top of it when it snows. So we'll conclude here, although there's a lot more we could talk about. As you can see on the screen, these are buildings that were not in my original report, but a French Freeman synagogue, Ethan Allen Shopping Center, one of the first automobile shopping centers in the state on North Avenue, the Burlington Federal Building, massive investment of federal infrastructure in Burlington. Julian Goodrich's Burlington Electric Building on Pine Street, Rowell Hall, a rare brutalist building on the UVM campus by the Architects Collaborative. The buildings we've discussed this evening and many others represent our modernist 20th century legacy. And my goal here is not to force you to like them. You're welcome to your own opinions and personal preferences. But what I do hope is that this evening's presentation will help all of us appreciate these buildings on their own terms as artifacts of a mid-20th century modern America. And I will conclude there with a special thank you to the UVM Silver Special Collections Library, which is a great partner in this research, and they now hold the archives of architects Louis Newton, Freeman French Freeman, Charlie Hubbard, Benjamin Stein, and Marcel Bowden, and others. And I could not do this research without UVM Special Collections. So thank you to them. Thank you for joining us tonight, and I'd be happy to take any questions.